Hello class, welcome back. Just a recap from last time. Last class we discussed the Neolithic Revolution and the shift of the human species from a hunter-gatherer nomadic group to a sedentary group that is an agrarian farmer civilization. Today we are looking at two ancient civilizations, Egypt and Sumer. Both are located by the Mediterranean Sea, and we're going to look at some similarities and differences as these two ancient civilizations emerge. So right here you see on the map both where Egypt and Sumer were. Sumer existed a little earlier than Egypt, and Egypt actually did take some influence from Sumer, but it did develop independently at the same time. Moving on to the next slide. So location and geography. So Sumer is between the Tigris and Euphrates River. This area is also known as the Fertile Crescent. These two rivers are basically the ground zero for civilizations. It's where it all begins. It's this fertile land that allows these ancient people to grow crops and to be prosperous. These plains are also called Mesopotamia, as you may see on one of your tests. It does have unpredictable floods, so that is an example of where you see the geography hindering the civilization. And there are natural resources in this area, but they do have to make do with what they have. On the ancient Egypt side of location and geography, you see that they are along the Great Nile River. So just like the Tigris and Euphrates, floods can be unpredictable. It is called the gift of the Nile, this flood every year where the water rises and makes the land very fertile, even by like the delta of the Nile, as you do see great soil for crops. You have these things called cataracts, which is what we know as rapids. And so when you think of the Nile, sometimes you think it's very peaceful, but in some areas it can be quite rough. And like I mentioned before, the delta, it is the most northern part of the Nile River, and it's a marshy triangular area that floods every year with deposits of very fertile soil. Moving on to religion, we will go more in depth on this topic next class when we go into belief systems, but just for now. So polytheistic means you believe in many gods. The Sumerians believed in about 3,000. Gods were all powerful and immortal. Humans were the servants, so we were living in their world. And souls of the dead went to the land of no return. So we do see essence of an afterlife here. You do start to see this like idea of like a legend or lore within the culture. Moving on to Egypt, kings or the pharaohs were the gods in the society, so that they lived among the people. Like I said, pharaohs are the god kings. The Egyptians are also polytheistic. As you see the word poly, that little prefix there, that means many, and theistic religion, so many gods. They had about 2,000 gods, and we'll go more in depth next class. You had the Ra, which is the sun god, Iris, which is the ideal mother or wife example, and Osiris, which is to choose afterlife. So very important aspect. You see this idea of an afterlife coming about here, and what you do in your regular life affects what happens after you die. So we're moving on to writing. Writing is a huge aspect of civilization because it's written record. It's preserving what these people did. Before the Neolithic Revolution, we didn't really have written records. We may have had like cave paintings, but nothing very concrete. So the Epic of Gilgamesh is an epic myth about unsuccessful quest for immortality. So coming back from religion, you see this reiteration of this idea of like what happens after you die. It's kind of it's ambiguous, and it scares these people as it still plagues us today. Moving on to the Egyptian side, you have these crude pictographs called hieroglyphics. They are sacred carvings, and they are written on dried papyrus. Papyrus is a crop grown in Egypt and is very similar to paper. And here are some examples. Moving on to government and law, another huge part of civilization and the culture is to have an organized system of governance. So on the Sumerian side, you have city-states, and each city-state is controlling the land around it, and it's very independent. You have these ziggurats, which are these big temples where the priests appeal to gods. It's a very center point of their civilization because religion plays such a central aspect. And warriors had very prominent control over their armies, a very, very, very conqueror's state. And you had dynasties. You'll see this in a lot of civilizations we go over, even moving on into the classical civilizations, where one family rules for many, many generations. Moving on to Egypt. Egypt is divided into Upper and Lower Egypt. We'll be doing a map activity. You can get a better idea of that. The Medes united in about 3000 BCE, so we're going to take a look at this map a little after this video. Theocracy. So going into rulers is a divine figure. As I said before, the pharaoh is the king god. It intertwines government and religion. It is almost as if it is one. And in Egypt, the pharaohs promoted truth and justice, or that's what they had the people believe that was the case. So here is an example. It's a reconstruction of a ziggurat at Ur. Ur actually is where Gilgamesh takes place. So the ziggurat is basically the Sumerian version of an Egyptian pyramid. Moving on to science and technology. So the Sumerians invented the wheel, sail, and plow. Here you start seeing direct influences of these ancient civilizations on what we have today. They were the first to use bronze as we push into the Bronze Age and start using these metals. And they had the first system of writing. It's a cuneiform system. And they also were very prominent in math. Their number-based system was 60, and they also were very prominent in geometry. Moving on to Egypt's side in science and technology, we have the creation of pyramids from limestone and granite. You see the construction of the pyramids so perfectly that they're still there today, not eroded by the wind and sand in the desert. As you guys have heard, mummification, it is a way to preserve their dead as we come back to this idea of religion and what happens in the afterlife. And they also had written numbers, so the Egyptians were also very into this idea of mathematics. And they also had great advances in medicine and surgery. So you can see there's this perception about ancient civilizations and they're almost being barbaric, but you do see human advancement really progressing here. Moving on to social classes. So priests or kings were the highest in the society in that hierarchical sense. Then we had the merchants, the workers, and then the slaves were at the bottom. Women had some rights, but not enough to get an education. You see that oppression in this society where if you do not get an education, it's very hard to become prominent and get these higher roles. Onto the Egyptian side, the royal families were the highest, then the government officials, the priests, and the commanders. And that intertanglement of the religion within this hierarchy is very telling about the Egyptians. And below the commanders, we had the merchants and the artisans and the unskilled laborers. So you do see some similarities between Sumer and Egypt. Okay, that is all the time we have. Please continue on to the flipped lesson activity, and I will see you all in class tomorrow. Bye, guys.